5.
Nanking Massacre denial is the denial that Imperial Japanese forces murdered hundreds of thousands of Chinese soldiers and civilians during the Second Sino-Japanese War. For the city of Nanking, the months between December 1937 and March 1938 were so brutal that the word nightmare doesn't begin to cover it. Mainstream historians estimate that between 250,000 to 300,000 people died. Many of them were said to be women and children. Often the victims were first beaten, then raped. Many also witnessed the horrific murders of their loved ones. However, some Japanese historians believe that the events in Nanking have been blown out of proportion. They contend that these acts were simply the usual killing and looting that happens during war. A full-scale war between Japan and China had started earlier in 1937. By December, Nanking was at the heart of what New York Times reporter Tilman Durden described as one of the greatest atrocities of modern times. Even Nazi generals spoke out against the horrors they saw. But decades later, Japan refused to admit or apologize for the horrific events that had happened there. In 1999, journalist Iris Chang was on the verge of publishing a book called The Rape of Nanking, when it was abruptly pulled by its American publisher because of pressure from Japan. Chang had been instructed to make changes to the book that would lessen the event's impact. She refused. According to Bill Guttentag and Dan Sturman, who visited Japan in 2006 to film a documentary, the levels of denial for some Japanese range from claims that propaganda exaggerated a minor event to the belief that it never happened. In the museum near Yasukuni Shrine, Nanking is completely overlooked, and it's claimed that Japan was forced into World War II by the US as a means of lifting America out of the Great Depression. Some of the women who survived the initial rape of Nanking were forced to work as sex slaves in Japan's notorious comfort stations. Although Japan issued an apology about the comfort women in 1993, the denial of the rape of Nanking is so great that there was even a debate over whether that apology should have been rescinded.
4.
The Waffen SS was established by Heinrich Himmler in 1939. Over the course of the war, the original 4 divisions grew to more than 20. Over 500,000 people wore the badge of this elite force. Like all members of the SS, they weren't subject to the same laws as the rest of Germany's civilians and military personnel. However, after the war, there was an odd movement to elevate the Waffen SS to a heroic status, even though it had been described as a criminal organisation and its members as war criminals during earlier proceedings at The Hague. Nevertheless, some German political parties made an appeal to the Waffen SS veterans. Certain newspapers also claimed that these veterans had been mistakenly confused with the Gestapo. Finally, the Mutual Help Association, HIAG, was formed to support Waffen SS veterans and whitewash their role in the war. The HIAG was accused of falsifying records and paperwork scholars in Bielefeld. Many HIAG members had been on trial for war crimes. The HIAG also claimed to represent about 2 million veterans, when the real number was closer to 20,000. But this misrepresentation succeeded in giving the HIAG major political clout in post-war Germany. The HIAG convinced the new German leaders that the Waffen SS largely denounced Nazism and had selflessly taken on the role of pariah. They claimed to have been reformed, but the Bielefeld scholars found that the HIAG members had a good reason for rewriting their history. They wanted their pensions. So how reformed were the members of the HIAG? In 1953, they organised a solstice parade that included singing the old classic, "This is the God that Adolf Hitler loves." The HIAG was finally dissolved in 1992.
3.
UDC uses and abuses the history of slavery. When you ask most people why the US fought a civil war, they will probably answer that the country was fighting over whether slavery should be legal. But even today, many schools in the Deep South teach students that the Civil War was about states' rights and constitutional law. In 2011, the Pew Research Center found that about half the people they surveyed thought the Civil War had been fought over a difference in opinion about constitutional law. Although Lincoln gave speeches about slavery dividing the country, the United Daughters of the Confederacy, UDC, has made a hugely successful run at rewriting that history. Established in 1894, the UDC was the premier ladies' organisation for anyone who was or was married to a person of some importance in the Confederacy. While they did a lot of good work, like preserving cemeteries and historic sites and supporting otherwise homeless veterans, they also travelled widely to speak about what makes the Confederate soldier the most majestic in history. Speaker Mildred Lewis Rutherford eventually published a book called The Truths of History, which claimed to expose the truth of Lincoln's weak intellect, the South's plan to free its slaves, and the Ku Klux Klan's true role as a peacekeeping organisation. The book caused a major problem in what was taught in schools. With education a federal matter for the first time in history, Southern textbooks were written by authors who had previously served in the Confederate government. It became rather common for any Southerner who suggested that the Civil War had been about slavery to be subject to ridicule, unemployment, blackballing, and social shunning. How successful was it? Well, in 2010, a group of South Carolinians proudly attended a succession ball commemorating the 150th anniversary of their state's withdrawal from the Union. They also honoured their native sons who had died protecting their homes against the aggression of the North.
2.
The Black Legend is a historical writing or propaganda that demonises Spain, its people, its culture, in an international attempt to damage its reputation. From the Spanish Inquisition to the atrocities committed by the conquistadors and explorers in the New World, the Spanish are at the centre of many terrible events in history. However, according to some people, this negative view of Spain's history is not justified. They blame the Black Legend for the misrepresentation of Spain's role in historical events. In 1914, Julian Juderas coined the phrase Black Legend when he claimed that many of the stories told about the terrible actions of Spain and its citizens were mostly propaganda. According to Juderas, other nations, especially Italy, wanted to erase from history all that was good, cultured and civilized about Spain. However, this type of thinking actually began shortly after the publication of the treatise, a brief account of the destruction of the Indies in the 1550s. The manuscript, written by Spain's Bartolomé de las Casas, exposed many of the atrocities that were occurring in the New World. Although this account was initially permitted to circulate throughout Spain and into Europe, Philip II banned the book when he took the throne only a few years later. At the same time that Spain's international power was declining, public opinion towards the treatise turned negative. By the beginning of the 17th century, the book reappeared a few more times. However, it was always denounced as a vile exaggeration of events written to delight the same foreign powers that were revelling in Spain's misfortunes. Meanwhile, there was a growing belief that Spain's atrocities had been exaggerated. In Germany, it was said that the Spanish were vilified because of their darker complexions and their tainted blood, which had mixed with that of the Jews and the Moors. As dark tales spread about Spain's actions at home and abroad, so did the claims that such stories were products of envious nations disseminating propaganda and hate.
1.
The Battle of Agincourt was a major English victory in the 100 Years' War. According to accepted history, Henry V led the English army to complete victory over the French despite being outnumbered 5-1. The Battle of Agincourt has long been one of the most celebrated defeats of the French, with the episode leading Shakespeare to coin the term Band of Brothers. However, a team of British and French historians decided to take another look at the battle, which has long stood as a testament to the longbow's power in combat. It was also considered to be one of the greatest victories in the face of dismal odds. All historians agree that Henry V landed in France on August 14, 1445, aligned himself with the Burgundians, and led a weary, disease-plagued group across the Somme River. From there, it's a story that everyone knows from mainstream history and Shakespeare. But a group of historians led by Southampton's University, Anne Curry, looked at contemporary documents from tax records, military rosters, pay records, ships, logs and wartime levies, and lists of the dead and the wounded. Contrary to the belief that the English were outnumbered 5-1, their analysis suggested that it was only about 2-1. It's even possible that the two sides were evenly matched. No matter how it was won, the Battle of Agincourt was nothing short of horrific. To maintain his popularity on home front, Henry V and his advisors probably stressed the incredible odds that the army had overcome as justification for the battle. It also gave them a reason to celebrate the might of the English army, rather than a loss of life to blame on the crown.